Have you ever wondered when it happened, when the world became so loud, so fast, so overstimulating, that silence itself started to feel uncomfortable? It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, quietly, like dust collecting on a bookshelf. One day you could sit with your thoughts, and the next day you needed noise just to exist. We used to enjoy small things, a quiet walk, a calm meal, a simple moment. But now even eating feels incomplete without a YouTube video running in the background. Our minds are restless, hungry, constantly searching for the next tiny hit of stimulation. We scroll during conversations, tap our screens without thinking, jump from one distraction to another trying to escape the discomfort of being alone with ourselves. And we don't call it addiction, we call it normal. But deep down, something feels off. There's a heaviness you can't explain, an anxiety that feels like static under your skin, a feeling that your mind is slipping out of your control piece by piece. And if you're brave enough to be honest with yourself, you've probably felt it too. Because addiction today doesn't always look like bottles or needles. Sometimes it looks like your phone lighting up every few seconds. Sometimes it looks like binge watching until your eyes burn. Sometimes it looks like hours lost to gaming, endless scrolling, or habits you promised yourself you'd quit tomorrow. And the scariest part? These addictions don't destroy you all at once. They steal you slowly. One day of just one more episode becomes months of numbness. One day of just 10 more minutes of gaming becomes nights where you don't even realize where the time went. One day of just one more scroll becomes years of attention lost to nothing. And somewhere inside this cycle, your identity begins to blur. You start becoming someone you don't recognize, tired, unfocused, easily irritated, chasing numbing pleasure instead of real fulfillment. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Addiction doesn't begin with weakness. It begins with pain. It begins with emptiness. It begins with a mind that's tired of fighting itself. The brain isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to protect you. When life becomes overwhelming, when you feel lonely, lost, or disconnected, your brain reaches for whatever gives the fastest escape. Dopamine becomes your shelter, your relief, your bandage. But like all bandages, it eventually peels off, and the wound underneath still bleeds. That's the part most people never understand. Addiction isn't about the habit, it's about what the habit is trying to silence. And every time you run to the screen, the game, the bottle, the tab, the scroll, you're not feeding pleasure, you're feeding escape. And somewhere deep inside, you know this. That's why every night ends the same. The moment the distraction fades, the emptiness returns. The motivation drains, the guilt creeps in. And you tell yourself again, tomorrow I'll change. But tomorrow never comes, because the cycle is stronger than your intentions. Yet here's the twist. This isn't your fault. Your brain is wired for survival, not self-control. High dopamine habits hijack your system, trick you into believing you're choosing pleasure, when actually you're choosing relief from discomfort. And the more you chase the highs, the lower your baseline drops. That's why you wake up tired even after sleeping. That's why nothing feels exciting anymore. That's why focusing feels impossible. That's why you feel stuck. But here's the part that matters. If your brain learned addiction, it can unlearn it too. You are not broken. You're overwhelmed. You are not weak. You're overstimulated. You are not lost. You're buried under habits that were never meant to hold you together. And if you stay with me through this entire story, you're going to discover a truth most people never realize. Breaking addiction isn't about fighting the habit, it's about understanding the mind that created it. Because once you see the real source of your cravings, you'll never look at your impulses the same way again. And that's where our journey truly begins. To understand how deeply addiction wraps itself around our lives, you have to picture the mind like a battlefield won, where you don't even realize the war started until you're already losing ground. It begins with something harmless, something small, a quick dopamine hit from a video, a game, a drink, a scroll, a tab. A moment of pleasure becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a refuge. At first, the brain rewards you. Every tap, every click, every sweet moment of escape feels like a little victory. But the brain doesn't give without taking. Dopamine spikes always come with a price. What goes up must crash. And every crash teaches your brain a dangerous lesson. That discomfort is something to run from, not something to feel. That any negative emotion must be silenced instantly. You feel bored? Stimulate. You feel lonely? Distract. You feel stressed? Escape. And slowly, Slowly, you forget how to sit with yourself. You forget how to feel anything without running from it. This is where addiction truly begins, not with the habit itself, but with the fear of being alone with your own mind. Modern addictions aren't about substances, they're about stimulation. People today aren't hooked on drugs. They're hooked on the relief of not feeling. The brain becomes so overstimulated that normal life feels unbearable. Reading becomes boring. Silence becomes threatening. Rest becomes impossible. Even joy feels muted, like a blurry memory of something you used to understand. And then, something even stranger happens. The addiction becomes part of your identity. When you scroll your phone, the moment you wake up. When you binge shows, the moment you feel lonely. When you game, the moment you feel stressed. When you run to adult content, the moment you feel empty, your brain begins to believe this is who you are. Not because it's true, but because repetition becomes identity. The brain learns patterns the same way rivers carve valleys, slowly, relentlessly, without permission. And before you know it, your habits have shaped your personality, your mood, your confidence, your goals, your entire way of living. That's why quitting feels impossible. You're not fighting a habit. You're fighting a version of yourself that your brain spent years building. And every time you try to quit, every time you try to start over, every time you say, "This time it will be different," the brain whispers back the same thing. But who are you without this? That question terrifies people more than addiction itself. But here's the truth most people never hear. You don't overcome addiction by removing the habit to overcome it by replacing the identity. The brain cannot thrive in a void. It needs direction, purpose, something new to obsess over. That's why so many people fail when they try to quit bad habits cold turkey. You can't remove the old wiring without installing something new. You need a healthier obsession, one that grows slowly, steadily, deeply. Something that raises dopamine gently instead of violently. Something that makes you proud instead of guilty. For some, it's working out. For some, it's learning a new skill. For others, it's building a career, a project, a mission. When you give your brain something meaningful to pursue, something that demands your focus, your energy, your passion, something shifts. Suddenly, the addiction loses its power. Not because you forced yourself away from it, but because you no longer have any space for it. The mind that was once drowning in dopamine begins to climb back to balance. The fog lifts, the restlessness fades, the guilt loosens its grip. And for the first time in a long time, you begin to feel present again. But even then, the urges come back. They always do. And this is where most people sabotaged themselves. They think the urge means they're failing. They think relapse means they're weak. They think one mistake erases months of progress. But that's not how the brain works. Urges are not commands. Thoughts are not instructions. A craving is just an echo, a leftover signal from a version of you that you're slowly outgrowing. The real battle is not in resisting the urge. It's in refusing to identify with it. Because when you stop seeing yourself as an addict trying to get better and start seeing yourself as a better person who no longer needs the addiction, everything changes. Identity shifts first. Behavior follows second. And when you start believing you are someone who deserves more, a better life, a clearer mind, a stronger heart, the brain finally begins to rebuild itself. But to complete that transformation, to truly escape the cycle once and for all, you need one final change, something deeper than willpower, stronger than habits, and more powerful than motivation. And that's where the final part of this journey begins. This is where everything changes, not because the addiction disappears, but because you finally understand the truth behind it. Most people think conquering addiction is about discipline, routines, or forcing yourself to stop. But the deeper you look, the more you realize that addiction isn't the enemy, it's the messenger. It's the symptom of a wound you never fully healed, a void you never filled, a loneliness you never named, a stress you never released, a version of you who felt unloved, unseen, overwhelmed. And as long as those wounds remain unaddressed, your brain will always reach for the quickest escape it can find. That's why the key is not just distraction or productivity or replacement, it's reconstruction. You have to rebuild the version of yourself who no longer needs to run away, because addiction fades only when the person underneath finally feels safe enough to live without it. The people who truly break free, the ones who never look back, are the ones who change their identity first. They stop saying, "I'm trying to quit," and start saying, "I'm not someone who needs this anymore." They stop asking, "How do I stop?" and start asking, "What kind of person am I becoming?" And the moment you ask that question honestly, you realize something powerful. You cannot heal while living the same life that broke you. You cannot build a new identity while following the routines of your old one. You cannot become someone stronger while surrounding yourself with the triggers that made you weak. So the transformation begins with environment, the apps you remove, the people you distance yourself from, the late-night habits you stop feeding, the hours you reclaim, the spaces you clean, the routines you replace. Your environment is not just where you live, it's who you become. Your surroundings either fuel your addictions or suffocate them. Change the environment, and your identity starts to shift. Then, something deeper begins, the obsession phase. Every person who breaks an addiction replaces it with something healthier that consumes their mind in a good way. Something they can think about when they wake up, something that occupies them throughout the day, something that excites them, challenges them, expands them. Whether it's fitness, art, business, writing, meditation, self-improvement, the obsession becomes the anchor. And slowly, the brain begins to rewire itself around this new source of meaning. Your dopamine stabilizes. Your focus sharpens. Your energy returns. Life begins to feel less like a chore and more like something you're finally participating in. But even here, the journey isn't perfect. Relapses happen. Temptation whispers. Old habits try to crawl back into your hands, your thoughts, your nights. And this is where most people break, because they confuse a setback with failure. But the truth is, relapse is not the end. It's data. It's insight. It's the brain revealing what still needs healing. The goal is not perfection. The goal is direction. If you fall today but rise tomorrow, you didn't lose, you learned, you progressed. You proved that even at your lowest, you can get back up. And rising after a relapse builds a strength that people who never struggle will never understand. Eventually, you reach the final stage, the identity shift that sticks. The moment when you look at your old habits and feel nothing, no longing, no temptation, no sense of loss, because you've become someone who genuinely doesn't relate to your old self anymore. And once that identity locks in, addiction loses its grip forever. You become someone who doesn't need constant stimulation, someone who doesn't run from discomfort, someone who can sit with silence and feel calm, someone who seeks meaning instead of escape, someone who builds instead of avoiding, someone who rises instead of hiding, someone who finally feels alive again, because the world changed, but because you did. And maybe, for the first time in years, you can look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Not the version buried under habits and guilt and numbness, but the version that was always capable of becoming more. The version that wanted to grow. The version that wanted peace. The version that wanted control of their life again. And if you're still watching, if you've stayed with this story until the end, it's because a part of you knows it's time. Time to take your life back. Time to stop running. Time to stop escaping. Time to stop hiding behind dopamine and distractions. Time to become the person that the younger you always hoped you would be. Addiction doesn't define you. Your past doesn't imprison you. Your habits don't own you. You are one decision, one identity shift, one new obsession away from becoming someone entirely different. And if you choose to, your life can start changing today, not when you feel ready. Not when the timing is perfect, but right now, because your future self is waiting. And they're stronger than your addiction ever was.